Hello and welcome to the Voice of Reason podcast. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's guest is Seerut Chawla, who is a London-based therapist who moved to London about a decade and a half ago. In this episode, we talk about the ways in which wokeness is negatively impacting therapy and how wokeness, and we try to define what that is, actually erodes people's ability to deal with trauma in a positive way. And if you like her and her thoughts, be sure to follow her on Twitter and Instagram, and links to her social media are down there in the description. So without further ado, here is Seerut Chawla. Thanks for being willing to express yourself in this medium.
Thanks for having me.
How long have you been doing the
Twitter?
Yeah.
Twitter's really new for me, actually. I started Instagram last summer. So just over a year, and that grew to about, I think I'm on 124,000 now. And nice. I started to get I realized two things. One, I really like building stuff, so it got really boring when it got big. And there's all these demands on you from the people that follow you, and I realized that I actually really like the striving and the adversity and the getting my teeth into something. And Twitter became a bit of a refuge. And I know that sounds really weird, but I'd had so much abuse on Instagram that Twitter just seemed like great fun and really relaxed in comparison. So
what's your content themes on Instagram?
It's a therapy page. It's a therapy page. So essentially trying to put up as much psychoeducation as I possibly can for free, because a lot of people can't access therapy. And I'm not a Mother Teresa, it's also for marketing. And I got onto Instagram really naively, thinking I'd be the only therapist on there. I thought that would be quite interesting, just a therapy page on Instagram. But there was plenty of therapists on there already, doing their thing, and I sort of plugged into this niche, and I have a really sort of conflicted relationship with this niche, because it's very woke. It's uber woke, as therapists tend to be. And
isn't that true?
And I found that being in this niche and dealing with consumers that are uber woke and dealing with therapists that are just some of what their personal philosophies seem to be are an anathema to me as a therapist and as a person. So I started to share more about resilience and more personal views and opinions and a little bit of anti-woke stuff, and it didn't go well at all. So Twitter became sort of more of an outlet for that. Yeah.
One way of defining the woke is how awful they are to people who aren't woke.
They go for your throat. They're ready to rip your throat out and dismember you with no hesitation, while saying, "I'm so compassionate." Like, they're such a weird bunch. And I think the thing that really, the juxtaposition of most of these people being white from the first world, fairly privileged, because especially if you're because most of them are American or Canadian, especially if you're North American and you have a degree or two under your belt, you're a fairly privileged person, I'd say. And them going for me as someone who grew up mostly in India, and brown, and I have, very heavy trauma, grew up in a patriarchy during a rape crisis. And I just thought, the irony of this, these people are going for me, but they think they're doing a good thing. I think that was one of my first red pilling moments yeah.
One thing that we can for certain say is that India, when we describe the patriarchy and we describe the culture of India, it's quantifiably different than when we talk about patriarchy in, let's say, the English-speaking world, if not Europe, the West world. The power structures are very cemented, and the disparate treatment of men and women are very distinct. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, you're absolutely right. If I fill out a form or want to open a bank account, it has to be, I need to give the names of my nearest male kin, for example. And then your dad or your husband or your brother would sign off on it, for example. So it's not, I think people don't realize how different it actually is. Like for me, when women talk about the patriarchy in terms of the West, I think it's quite laughable. I don't think there's a patriarchy here. I think the way Jordan Peterson describes it of being a competence hierarchy, I can see that. I think traditionally men have had more power, but there's also a lot of biological and complex reasons for that. And, these analyses, again, I think Jordan Peterson's talked about it, of why men make more money, they do more dangerous jobs, they don't necessarily take time out for child rearing. There's a lot of complex reasons, and it's a very low resolution understanding to say these patriarchal, power-hungry, misogynistic men. I mean, there are misogynists, but to label the whole structure misogynistic is a misdiagnosis, I think, especially when you compare it to India or Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, where it is like misogyny is written into the basic doctrine.
Mm-hmm. When did you, how old were you when you migrated or moved to?
I was 21, and I'm now almost 37.
And you went here for college, or you went there for college? I'm assuming you're in Britain, London.
Yeah, I'm in London. Yeah, my mom's actually from here. She's Indian ethnically, but she grew up in the UK. So it was very easy for me to come here. And when we were little, we spent a lot of time here, and it was easier for me to come here. And I felt I was being suffocated in India. I think as someone who had fairly liberal parents, at least my mum is, being culturally British, and growing up with the threat of rape is awful. It's scary. And then there was trauma at home, which was pretty severe as well. So I think the best way I can put it is I escaped to here, and then I kind of put myself back together again.
Going without having to go into the trauma specifics, I wonder how that's informed your understanding of psychodynamic therapy or therapy, and with the thought in mind of eventually kind of describing to us why you think so-called wokeness or woke therapy is antithetical to a therapeutic practice or getting better.
Yeah, so I think there's in very broad strokes, I think human beings are wired to overcome adversity. We're wired to strive and to get our teeth into obstacles and to move forward. And I don't think trauma is the best way to achieve that, but I think
like the pain is just the weakness leaving your body school of
yeah, no,
rearing.
That's bollocks. That's crap. But I think what trauma can do for you, if you're lucky enough to get help, which not everybody can access, unfortunately, it should be a basic healthcare thing, is post-traumatic growth is a very real phenomenon. And if you think of your kind of capacity as a person for what you can tolerate, you'd call that your window of tolerance, which is sort of like a trauma model term of art. And I think post-traumatic growth widens your window so significantly, especially if you've had pretty extreme, what they call big T trauma. That's what I think, and I think that's been my first-hand experience. It's been I used to work with refugees from Afghanistan, and compared to them, my experience is really nothing. Things like walking in the streets and being raped by the Taliban, being just grabbed into a building, and not having water, so you have to go foraging for water for your family as a 5-year-old child, working. And they're some of the most inspirational, strong, good-humoured people I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. And then when you look at that in comparison with what we're seeing in the West, which is some of the most ungrateful, angry, fragile group of people, and they've not had anything, of the same sort of experience. And I think something happens to human beings when you have too much comfort. I think you start to malfunction. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but this is something that I've started to feel recently. And the conditioning of young people into postmodernist thinking, I think that causes mental health problems.
Could you define what you mean by postmodernist thinking?
Deconstructing things. So something that I notice a lot of my clients who've been to university in Europe or North America, let's say, they learn a lot about applied postmodernism, which we call wokeness colloquially, at university. And one of the things they do is, James Lindsay was talking about this in, I think, the Great Awakening talk he did recently, where they like to play with ideas. And when you upend somebody's sense of reality, you do something really profound to their mind, because you're taking away from somebody that down is down and your feet are there and you're grounded and this is what the world is, this is the truth and you can hang your hat on it. That's taken away from a vast sort of swathe of people, and they nothing has meaning. And that's a feature of clinical depression, where the world literally becomes meaningless and pointless. And you have this, affective disorders like anxiety and depression, they're rising. The numbers are rising. And I don't think this is an insignificant factor.
It's almost as if what we term wokeness is a trauma inflation regimen, where the first step of postmodern thinking is to upend reality, to kind of pull it all apart, and then the way that you glue it all back together is through oppression or privilege, which is negative oppression, or the opposite of oppression in a way.
Well, it's superimposing into people. So if you think of the ideology as a matrix, you're putting a matrix into somebody's head, and now they're not able to think. It's like a cage, and all their thinking happens in this cage. And it's like it's very fundamentalist. So if you're white and you're male and you're straight, well, you're at the bottom of this hierarchy. And then the higher you go up, the more intersectionality points you have. You're the top of the hierarchy. So I was having a conversation before Biden picked his vice president choice with a North American therapist. And I said, I wonder who he's going to choose, and I hope it's somebody that offsets him really well so that he's a good choice to vote for. And her response was, I hope he chooses a black woman. And I just thought, based on what? Why wouldn't you want him to choose the best person for the job? Why somebody who's black and a woman? It's such an arbitrary thing. I can't even remember how I got to this. What the original question was.
Why would you not think that way? Why do you not think that way?
That he should choose a black woman.
Well, just why are you not woke? What is it in your experience or your philosophy that causes you to resist that?
So one, I grew up in a very oppressive culture, and I say oppressive in both senses of the word. It felt suffocating, and it was oppressive in that way. And a lot of arbitrary rules are imposed upon you. So girls can do this and girls can't do that. And this is how when you talk about gender roles, that's a great place to study them. Or patriarchal cultures are a great place to actually look at gender roles. And I never quite fit what girls are meant to do. And it always felt like I was wearing a costume. And I think from when I was quite small, I'd question these rules. So I was the troublemaker, asking questions and being difficult and not listening, and I think,
which means not complying, basically.
Not complying. I think when you look at my big 5 scores, I think they indicate why I'm not woke. I'm very comfortable with being disagreeable and asking questions, not being horrible, but I'm not just going to listen to you because you said a thing. And my neuroticism is quite low, so I don't really mind if people don't like me, and I'm very open, so I want to explore ideas. And I didn't comply, and I didn't fall in line, and I have to give my mum credit for that, because she was like that too. She didn't comply and she didn't fall in line. And yeah, my image of my mom is always, instead of like all the beige ladies being nice and drinking tea, that was my mom with like long red nails, red lipstick, and like withering one-liners. So it was quite a good...
I kind of want to interview her now.
Oh, she's really cool. You'd like her.
But you were given every opportunity or incentive to be a deconstructor, and you were deconstructing, but that doesn't go. But you stop at some point. It seems
stop at some point, and the point has to be sense. Like, you can't. There's a point where you start deconstructing and you lost contact with reality. And I don't know whether that's another factor could be the amount of therapy I've had because of the stuff I've been through. And one of the things that talented therapists do, and I've been lucky enough to see talented therapists, is they evidence test your beliefs. And that's sort of a CBT thing, cognitive behavioral.
What's that comprised of?
Okay, so for example, if I say, Benjamin just looked at me slightly strangely, and I think that means he thinks this interview is going terribly. So I could, when you evidence test that in your head, you can kind of look at it as, well, are you making meaning of that because you're feeling about yourself in a certain way? Or is that corresponding with reality? Like, do you have any evidence to support this belief? And I think that's something that... I do a lot with my own clients and probably with myself a fair amount. I had a massive blow-up argument with my partner, and I'm still kind of, we're still in the aftermath of it. And I was saying to myself earlier, like, you know, I'm labeling him all these things in my head, but I'm going to leave room for the fact that I might be making meaning based on how hurt I'm feeling right now. So that is constantly... making contact with reality. And I think that's something that I don't know whether I do it naturally. I don't know what exactly it is, but it's something that I've always had, I think. I think even when I was young and things were being perpetrated against me that shouldn't have happened, the thing that got me through was somehow I knew it was wrong.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to ask you about. You said earlier about Pakistani people or Afghanistani people who have been through so much, and yet they are very resilient, very positive, very kind. It seems like there's a framework that's not necessarily attached to what is. It's the aughts. There's some sort of cultural mythology or ethical system, or maybe a religion that allows people to have a relationship with what is, but still is a heuristic ultimately.
Well, you have to have a relationship with what is so I think that leads me on to being in the third world. You're constantly in contact with the reality because you have to think about your basic needs all the time.
Okay.
And I think that might be what it is. So Afghanistan is in much worse shape than India. India is starting to become was developing quite quickly. And but Afghanistan, of course, is beleaguered by wars and all sorts of things, and internal infighting, the Sunni and the Shia and all that. So the people there have had to fight for survival in a way that even I can't understand. And all of these clients that I worked with then, they are all of them worked from when they were quite young. All of them, when I say young, I mean under 10, in single digits, they were working and contributing to their families. how can you not be in touch with reality if that's how you grew up? That's contact with reality that most of us will never understand.
And so with that contact, that extreme amount of contact with basic needs, what do you see as the next step up? How do you, or what are some of the themes or the constants of a good philosophy that could withstand being so removed from reality that you're constantly warm and well-fed, like what are good values that can, keep you pointed towards reality as you scale up from that?
I think they sound really, really old-fashioned. But I think the values that I like are things like courage and honor and doing the right thing, even if nobody's watching you. I think all of these, I don't know where all the Indian meta-narratives teach you this sort of stuff. So I'm sure I assimilated some of that. And then all the Disney films, they all follow the same sorts of meta-narratives. And I watched lots of those as a kid. And I'm sure I assimilated from that as well. But I think an easier way to answer that question is to look at what I see when I see people I grew up with, even myself, my family, is that contact with reality, and you're not encouraged to be fragile. No one says to you, "Oh, you're crying. That's really valid, and you should just cry a lot more." No one said, there's no narrative like that. That's not a culturally acceptable thing to say. You might be soothed, you might be given a hug and given a cuddle, but you're encouraged to pull yourself back together. I don't think that's the same here.
I wonder where that went, that kind of esteem-based philosophy or ethic, or trophy
like
prizes and stuff.
Well, it's almost, I hate participation trophies. But it's almost like the stiff upper lip, man up rhetoric had a response and the pendulum swung too far. And then you have people like, I'm going to assume you as well, then are now countering the pendulum having swung that far. Because it's not healthy to tell people that it's okay to have no meaning in your trauma and be upset for the rest of your life. This is not going to help people heal. And this definitely comes from, I can see there's been a creep of postmodernism into therapy. And I don't know whether it's because therapy is less scientific than psychology, and whether therapy is closer to social work, and social work is definitely in the Venn diagram with grievance studies and other humanities, whether it's close enough that it filters through. But all of the woke ideals of identity first instead of humanity, and over-validating, coddling, it has insidiously burrowed its way into therapy, but it's at the cost of the client.
And the practitioners and the clients don't know that. I mean, just judging from the brief amount of explanation of your experience you're saying, but I see this replicated over and over again. Like I said, one defining feature of wokeness is an extreme intolerance for questioning or anything that goes against itself. So it seems like this fundamentalist, proselytizing, and very puritanical kind of movement is it's weakening your practice, and I know that from speaking with other therapists too. How do you see that being countered? Is it just individual after individual standing up and getting canceled or risking that, or is there a way to challenge this stuff because it is so fraught that it can't resist any challenges, or it has to attack any challenges?
I think it has to be both. I think therapists who have retained some common sense need to start speaking up, and speaking up courageously and saying, do your worst, cancel me, make a fuss, scream and shout, but I'm not going to stop talking about this. And And I think we also need our regulatory bodies to be less spineless, because they have all cowered to wokeness. So what the APA is recently, their recent statements, even my regulator, which is the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, has completely changed focus, and recently even had us all vote on whether we should use intersectionality as a modality with clients.
How would that work?
I don't know. It didn't pass, thankfully. I think.
Okay. Yeah.
I think we're not as woke as you guys are yet, but it's growing in the dark here, just like it did there. And we're lucky that people like yourself and James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and lots of others speak about it. But people need to listen to you. And, that's kind of the problem. I think people dismiss it like, oh, this is just it's never going to happen here. It's going to be a conspiracy theory. These people are sort of alarmists. I think it's very easy for people to dismiss difficult things like that. But if you look around you, there's evidence of it everywhere. So you have to pay attention, and you have to be a little bit courageous. I think that's going to be the answer. It's to stop going along with the crowd and say what you see, not what you're being told to say.
What are the outcomes you see for clients who are given the woke model of therapy? What are some of the signs that they exhibit and coping mechanisms that they adopt?
Well, they don't cope very well. They don't cope very well because then they're one of the rhetorics that I hate is that they're now problematizing resilience, and they're saying you shouldn't have to be resilient because the world is oppressive, which is why you have to be resilient. So the oppression should be removed, and then you can just be as you are. What kind of stupid bollocks is this to tell people?
I don't even understand how what that even means. Like, they're advocating people like regress to a larval stage of development? Is that what it is?
I mean, yeah. So I saw a post from a therapist today who said, you don't have to find meaning in your trauma. And I saw that and I thought, well, that's idiotic. The basic, one of the biggest protective factors that stops the development of PTSD after trauma exposure is the ability to make meaning of what happened to you. So this completely counters actual scientific research or psychological research. And they say things like, so you might have heard this aphorism, which is the wound is where the light gets in. And which is a nice thing. I mean, it's not going to change your life, but yeah, it's nice. And there was a therapist who took that and crossed it out and wrote on the bottom, the wound is where it hurts, or the wound is where it really fucking hurts. So she crossed out the wound is where the light gets in. So again, you're encouraging people to just spend their time thinking about how much they hurt, how hard they've had it, how difficult life is, how oppressive life is, instead of helping them reframe to their competencies and their abilities to overcome.
So it's almost like instead of going through an alchemical process of turning your pain into something that has a higher order of significance or relevance, you magnify and concentrate that pain. So it never changes. So you do have meaning, but that pain, I guess, just eventually just everything turns into that pain, or you see that pain constantly everywhere. And then you have to ask, well, what does that do to you psychologically? How do you then behave? And how do you feel about life then when you follow that path?
Well, it's a mixture of exactly what you described, concentrating that pain, and then you're just sitting there coddling it. Like, here's my pain, and I am sitting with it, and aren't I doing some great healing work? Well, no, you're fucking not. So it's what did I just do? I think I opened a second window of you.
I can't. So I want to question, what do you mean by meaning then? What is the process of turning trauma into meaning. What do you mean by meaning, and what are some of the processes of that?
Well, we make meaning in so many different ways. Everyone has a different way to make meaning of the world. Some people use religion. Some people use spirituality. It's a funny word because it's implicit meaning. So, or there are people that kind of believe in philosophically nihilism or absurdity or stoicism. So we have different frameworks, and you can use your framework intelligently to make meaning of what happened to you. And I do think there's some truth in some of the stuff that therapists say, like, of course everything, because there's a lot of what they call toxic positivity. And, you can say, yes, of course, not everything happens for a reason. You can't say that a child being assaulted happened for a reason. You're an idiot if you say that. Yeah. But you can make meaning of it in terms of the Stoic way would be to prevail or endure. If you look at it from the tradition I grew up in, which is Sikhism, it would be that happened, but God is with you, God is supporting you. And there's different ways you bolster yourself up that undergird you and that support you in being confronted with the world and being confronted with painful, difficult things. But we've removed, especially in the Western world, religion is now it's passé. No one cool is religious. And it's not...
Well, Kanye is trying to bring it back.
Yeah.
He's pretty cool.
He's not doing a good job, though, is he?
I don't know. He started a Sunday church service. I don't know how.
Which is quite nice. It's quite a nice idea. But so what do people have to undergird them? That's some sort of a buffer or a defense when you're being confronted hard with the world. So like all these people who've completely fallen to pieces over 2020 because they've never seen anything like it.
2020, the news show?
This year.
Oh, okay, the year. Okay, sorry. Of course.
So this year has been a bit of a, clusterfuck.
Yeah, it's a test, right? Or it's proof that the world is woven out of oppression and nihilistic.
I don't know what it is, and I can't. I'm not going to pretend I know what it is, but what I can say is, growing up with a bomb going off in the local market, or the power being gone for 3 days when it's 50 degrees outside, or being beaten to shit in your house, or all those things. So then a year like this happens, you're like, yeah, this shit happens in the world sometimes. You can't fall to pieces over it. You have to carry on. And I think that's what we're taught in the East, which is that you have to carry on. Whereas that's not what's being taught to young people now. They're being taught that, no, you don't carry on. You stop and you attend to your pain at the cost of everything else. And I don't think that's very healthy.
Well, there's two ways. You stop and you attend to your pain, but you also join the mob in order to defeat the systemic pain. So it's at once your individuality is defined by this pain, but society itself is also defined by that pain. And so you kind of skip the Jordan Peterson or whoever said, clean your room. Instead of working on yourself, building yourself up, you leap from that individual pain into this kind of this mob, and then you go through and try to change the structure. Stuff like that.
And the people that are attracted to this tend to be people who, have that attachment style that they want to be in a group. I mean, they talk about collectivism all the time, which I think is really funny because none of them lived it, and it's not sunshine and roses. You wouldn't necessarily want to be. I left collectivism because I hate it. I think individualism is, for me personally, far superior. And they form this homogenized group identity where you don't have to be an upright individual with a fully formed, robust personality and who's completely self-sufficient and takes personal responsibility, because you now have a group to prop you up. So there's something going on there. It's this sort of the psychology of group dynamics. Something strange is happening there as well. And and what you're being fed all the time, especially when you're under the age of, is it 27 or 28, when your prefrontal cortex fully develops. These things, they form the way you make meaning of the world. So that's their meaning-making structure. Privilege is original sin, and then oppression, the sort of mystical force that's keeping us down. I have a client who lives in Europe who recently said to me, the reason I'm depressed is because of the patriarchy. Like, no, you're not. That's ridiculous.
How do you talk somebody out of that then?
So again, start evidence testing. Well, what do you mean by the patriarchy in France? Well, of course, she couldn't give an answer to that. And then, what instances have you had with patriarchal men that have caused you to get depressed? And are you sure that instance you're describing is because he was, acting out of some kind of patriarchal oppression, or what else could have been going on? You start to open them up to other possibilities. But it's like deprogramming somebody who's in a cult. It's really difficult work.
Well, it's difficult work, but also I think it could be also difficult, or that the difficulty can be conflated by, they being offered all this other affirmation therapy elsewhere. Like, well, you come to me and I'll affirm your pain. I won't say that that's where the light gets in. That really fucking hurts, girl. You're so powerful in your tears, I guess. And then how do you convince somebody that actually, well, if you look where that leads you, I guess that's what you have to do. Well, if you look where that leads you, is that what you really want? If you want me to give you what you want, what do you really want? I guess
Well, there's some people that are invested in staying upset and down because there can be. And I'm not at all speaking of people who have been legitimately victimized, or people that are living in actual oppressive systems like Palestine or, Bangladesh or whatever. But exactly as you described, there's a you're celebrated in the group. The more you sort of perform this virtue and this pain, the more you raise your status. And then the more you attack other people that don't kind of live the way you've decided to live, which is why I think it's a fundamentalist zeal. Again, you're raising your status, so they're getting something out of it. It's a big reward.
Socially, I guess, more than personally, in the long run.
Well, being affirmed by other people and other people looking at you like you're special because of your color or your gender or your sexual orientation, that it seems to appeal to a certain kind of person. I think people that maybe don't feel very good about themselves, don't feel very good about who they are. I think I tweeted a few days ago about how identity characteristics aren't a replacement for a personality. And that's how they're being used. Whereas cultivating a personality that anybody wants to be around and go to dinner with you, you have to work on yourself. You have to be truthful with yourself. You have to undertake some kind of self-inquiry, and cultivate who you are as a human being, more than just resting your laurels on, well, I'm brown and a woman, and I think I might be queer, but I'm not sure. You can't. That's not. Yeah.
And it only works in one direction, as you've witnessed, as somebody who's the not white, not European woman. As soon as you disagree, you're out. You lose every point as soon as you disagree. So,
yeah, well, I've been called anti-black, which is like interesting. I was actually called anti-black last night on Twitter. I was trying to engage a young woke woman in conversation, and she said, "Great, thanks to you retweeting me," because she came to my page to say something, and thanks to you retweeting me, I've been opened up to lots of white opinions. And so I asked her,
It's like the white blood cell of the to a virus, right?
Yeah. And I said to him, no one had ever told you that white people are evil and responsible for, all the ills of the world. And would you say something like white opinions? Like, how would you feel if someone said to, because I think she was Latin. How would you feel if someone said to us brown opinions? It was just gently evidence testing, just really, really subtly, not trying to be patronizing in it. It's trying to walk that line, because you can get a bit patronizing if you're not careful. And she couldn't have it. And then even she put up a link to some university which was saying that institutional racism is intentional. And again, so and I said to her, are you aware that these are all assertions? That none of this is proven? And she said, why do you think your assertion is more important than that of a black scholar? And then I was sort of like, well, why did you bring it back to why does the color matter?
Yeah.
Why can the idea not stand on its own merit? And again, so even if that conversation went a little bit tits up, which it did, maybe these will leave the tiny seeds of questions in her head. And maybe it'll open up to a little bit of cognitive dissonance that she won't ignore. Don't know, but maybe.
There's something you said earlier that I wanted to unpack a little bit. You said that from your Sikh background, you said something about the idea of God being with you.
Yeah.
There's a subtle difference between God intends this to happen to me, rather than God is with me through this thing. Could you talk about that, or that philosophy?
Yeah. So Sikhism, of all the religions I could have been born into in India, because they're all very dogmatic and ideological, I'm really glad it was Sikhism, because it was formed about 300 years ago in response to the Hindu and Muslim infighting. So the person that founded Sikhism, he took the firstborn son of all Hindu and Muslim families and formed Sikhism to kind of be this secular answer to these religious clashes. And so in our doctrine, it says women are equal to men. Community is really important. We don't do no meaningless rituals, no idol worship. You don't go sit in a church and think you're a good person. Service or worship is actually being a good human being. So, for example, it's very common that all Sikh temples, they're called gurdwaras, are run by the community that goes there, and that's your service to other people. Everyone's equal, every human being's equal. So we have a free kitchen in every gurdwara that's open to everyone. It doesn't matter what your faith is or your gender or anything. Everyone's welcome. And everyone sits on the floor together. And I think the scripture literally says a beggar and a king sit side by side, and there should be no differentiation. So most of what I know about is from my grandmother, and she was my protective factor growing up. And she is very stoic, and Sikhism is very stoic. The philosophies really intersect. And that's what she told me. So she couldn't always protect me from everything. But the thing that I was always told is that God is with you, and God will protect you, and God will be with you. I wasn't told this is happening because God wanted it to happen to you. Yeah. I was never, ever told that. And
that's the way you describe it is it's very similar to Stoicism, but also like the liberal values, secular values, like equality under God or equality under the law. Yeah. Did that kind of, do you know the history where how those ideas like were pronounced by the first dude or the prophet? I don't know.
The guru.
The guru.
So yeah, it was in response to what they thought was going wrong in India 300 odd years ago. And so even we have a community of not just patriarchs, but matriarchs. Women are very strong in the Sikh community. And kind of a joke about women in the Sikh community smacking their husbands with rolling pins and stuff like that. But it is very, now that you say that, it's really obvious. It is very much about liberal values, equality. Gender equality is a massive thing. Like in India, not all girls have access to education unless you're Sikh. Then you have to be educated.
Okay.
So it's very much about liberal values, about stoicism, about common sense. That's really important. And one of the stereotypes of our community is that we work hard, but we play harder. So, we're not teetotal, we drink, we gamble, we do all the fun things, but be a good human being. So it's kind of a cool religion.
Yeah, it sounds really cool.
Well, yeah.
Is it generally, does it get along with the other religions in India?
Yeah, it's kind of the one that does. Everyone likes the Sikhs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. We tend to be quite, like, the stereotype of us is that we're quite jovial.
The friendly business guy won't rob you, but
sort of.
he will bet pretty strong.
Yeah. And also, sort of, if you look at the caste system, we're the second caste down. So we're the warrior caste. So there are 4 castes in India. The top caste, which is like the class system here, but so the Brahmins, then the Kshatriyas, which is us, which are the warriors and the defenders. And then you have like the sort of tradespeople and the money lenders. And then you have the people that do the menial jobs.
Retail workers. You said that there's a class system in London. Could you describe that? Or I guess in the West, like, what do you see as the caste system that we're operating under?
Well, you seem to have, here it seems to be a class system that is, it's different in England, I think, because in England, birth makes a difference to your class. Whereas it seems like to me, not that I know, I don't understand it in depth about North America, but it seems financial. And it seems like the working class are the people that do all the blue collar work and that struggle and live paycheck to paycheck. And the middle class is sort of therapists, social workers, normal job people. And then your elites seem to be, the rich people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that sort of how it is?
It's interesting because if you actually look at it, the blue collar, the traditionally pictured blue collar worker makes more money than than anybody except for the elite. You know, the plumber, the garbage man, the union worker, stuff like that. They actually do make really good money, more than the social worker. But the social worker, the bougie social worker, thinks of themselves as a better class of person because they're helping the poor person or because they have the right ideals. And that's the interesting intersectionality between wokeness and class. It seems to be a way of insulating the bourgeois people, insulating themselves from the person who's more tied to reality, who actually makes the world run, kind of thing, in a way.
Yeah, that is really interesting because it's that academic gloss that you think puts you at a higher status in the world somehow, when really it just makes you a bit more of a, like, I always think of academics as pontificators. Quite good at pontificating, but how many academics make things happen in the way that blue-collar workers do? Not many.
Yeah, and that is reflected in their ideas, where they a lot of these academic theories are never tested against reality, and they are designed in such a way that they ignore reality or deconstruct reality, and that's what we have with wokeness, with these ideas, these critical theory ideas breaking out of the academy, like with my study being Evergreen State College, being what happened there, being that these intersectional critical theories went critical. They went critical. They took over the institution. They drove it into the ground. Everybody who was on the side of them completely ignored the evidence, completely ignored how that made them look, how that made them feel, how that made them behave, because for whatever reason, they can't look at what they caused. And I fear that that's kind of what we're seeing is that built into this ideology isn't just an ignoring of reality, but a visceral attacking of anything that would make you look at what it's causing you to do. And I guess that's kind of what I'm seeing in how you saw people behaving on Instagram.
Well, what's the state of Evergreen now?
They're at 50% of where they were. They're just kind of hobbling along and waiting on that government money that will, of course, come to them because they are ideologically aligned with the current governance in Washington. It's all Democrats up and down the board, so that they think the right way, so they'll get enough money. But the actual reality is that they completely lost their credibility as an institution of education. And I think that because they didn't actually make good on that, like, and say, we messed up, this stuff went overboard, and these are the reasons why, and this is how we're going to modify what we mean by equity, what we mean by diversity, what we mean by inclusion, and tying that to actual academic prowess or the pursuit of education and thoughtfulness and other virtues and stuff other than just inclusion and diversity.
And it's just, as an Indian person, I just thought, Jesus Christ, imagine if students in India overran a university like that. And the antisocial behavior. It's
unimaginable?
Unimaginable. It's absolutely unimaginable. They would get, the police would come in and probably beat them up. That's probably what would happen.
Yeah.
Nothing like that. It couldn't. And just the things they did to Brett Weinstein, like locking him in the building and searching cars, is just sort of, it beggars belief. And especially when he was on their side, it's just the hardest thing to understand.
Yeah.
And the fact that the academy is looking at all this horrifying antisocial behavior and saying, we support you.
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah. That's kind of, I don't think that they have a choice, because if they didn't accept them, then they would have to review their actual belief system. And that's my own prejudiced bias on the thing. It's like, you guys don't look at this, you don't criticize yourself, because if you did, you would have to admit you're wrong, and then the whole tower of cards collapses. Yeah. Where did you do your education? Was it in London?
My first degree was in India. I went to art school.
Oh,
I got a BFA in painting.
Oh, okay.
It's completely, did a lot of different things. Did music then, and then I did my therapist training at the University of Roehampton in London. And they have a pretty good psychology program. So, and then before that, I had to do what they call national vocational qualifications, just to make sure I met the standards. So I did those at a few different community colleges. So a lot of different places.
And what prompted you to do this work, do therapy then?
I think initially to work out what was going on with me, because I didn't have an understanding or a language yet that heavy trauma will fuck you up. But there was something wrong with me. So that's what I did. And I went off and started doing it. And then I always found the skills practice really fun, really gratifying. And I did quite well when it came to clinical placements and stuff like that. And I don't know, just something in me just said, well, just stick to this, get good at this, sharpen your skills. And I did, and I do really enjoy it. But I think I'm finding more and more that it is. I might go on to do a doctorate. I am really considering that, because it's the research and the science that's getting me is more intellectually stimulating to me. Especially with therapy being taken over by wokeness.
That's unfortunate. That's what's kind of happening in the academy. It's that it's becoming such a discouraging place for free thinkers, for independent thinkers to exist within, that it's going to lead to more and more of the best people just going away, or the people who are actually benefiting the clients or benefiting the students are getting either chased off or just shutting down their free thought. It seems it's kind of a cliche that those who need psychology study psychology. Do you think that there are things in place that show, like, okay, this isn't just about you. This is about you actually being good at this?
I think that's really true. They kind of talk about this wounded healer trope, which I think is just like a bit of a Ponzi way of saying aren't I special? I'm so wounded and now I heal people. It's just it's a bit narcissistic and a bit silly. What I'm grateful about here is that you can't qualify unless you have 36 hours of personal therapy each year that you train. So you come out of it a very sorted, grounded person. So when you go on to see clients, you're not taking your own crap with you. And whereas I don't think a lot of the rest of the world does that. And it should be the case, really, because if you're rooting around in somebody's head with all their mental health stuff, you should be sure you've got yours well dealt with. And, like, especially as a psychodynamic therapist, you work a lot with transference and countertransference. How could you even identify what that is if you don't know what your stuff is really intimately?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's really shown in the Instagram wounded healers community. I dipped into that. I'm like, oh my God, are you serious? One of my frequent guests is a licensed professional counselor, Sasha. I don't know if you know her, but you guys would totally get along. Okay. But so I look into what she's dealing with, and I'm like, it's just a bunch of mainly women compounding everybody's pain and their own. And then, so whether or not critical theory is useful academically, when you put it into a psychotherapy situation, it wreaks havoc on individuals.
Well, we now have the rise of the critical therapist.
What is that?
What could be worse than that? I made it up. But like a critical theorist.
The critical therapist.
The critical
therapies. You should write the book.
I might have to write a book, actually. A publisher got in touch with me recently about that. I was like, do I have this? I really want to do it, though. I want to, ream them. That's probably not a good attitude, but I really want to.
I think there's an actual need for that, and I think you would actually have. I think that there's a need not only for people to speak up, like you were saying, but for good, grounded literature, critiquing and criticizing this stuff will really help out those moderate voices, those independent thinkers who are staying silent right now.
Yeah. And that's the thing, the people who are licensed associate counselors, so they're dependent on the person supervising them, who could be the wokest person in the world. So they have to be quiet because they're dependent on them to get their licensure, because you have such a different system there. And I know quite a few people who privately get in touch and say, I really agree with you, and thank you for talking about this, but they daren't because they will lose their means of survival. Yeah. So
what are some tips that you have? Let's say people's behavior online. What do you or the way that information reaches us online? What are some good coping mechanisms for communication and ingestion of information?
It's so bloody difficult because I'm as addicted as anybody else.
Okay,
so it's so difficult when it comes to ingesting the information, because in between sessions I have 10 minutes to go to the loo and write my note. I go to the loo and I look at Twitter. That's what I actually do. My notes get done at the end of the day, it's difficult because the app is designed to keep you on there and keep you scrolling. So they've designed these things really cleverly. Like, a lot of psychologists use their powers for evil and got us all hooked onto them. But when it comes to communicating online, I'd say you have to bring the social contract online, because I think that's something that we haven't done, and that's why antisocial behavior is so rampant. Because, walking down the street, you wouldn't say to somebody, oh, you fucker or something, would you? Unless you want to get the shit beaten out of you. And you can't do that online either. You have to bring the real world social contract online and treat people the way you would as if they were in front of you. And we just have to get better at that. Assume less. ask clarifying questions if you need to, and there's absolutely no reason to engage with every person that has a differing opinion. I wonder what's going on with us collectively, that we go online to discharge this frustration and built up of something, and feel the need to find people who don't agree with us and just start a fight. Like, what has happened? Just walk away. It's fine. You can just walk away.
You say that, but I see you holding your ground, and I don't mean that as a criticism. You hold your ground, and I think that that's really refreshing. One of the reasons I was attracted to your account and wanted to speak with you. So what's the proper way to hold your ground then? Or what are some tips on drawing lines?
I think as a person, I don't suffer fools gladly, and I get quite quickly annoyed by somebody behaving like an idiot. I think it's, again, with the social contract, it's very galling when you adhere to the social contract and other contract and people just flout it. That can be really annoying. But I think I'm quite firm on my boundaries and what I will and will not tolerate from other people. And I'm not, like, I find a lot of therapists treat other people as if they're customer service agents, which that's not who I am. So I see someone leave a comment to a therapist saying, I think everything you said is a pile of shit and you're an idiot. Something like near enough that. And the therapist will say, that's so interesting, tell me more. Like, that's just not how I'm ever going to respond to a person. And it's always going to be, I will say to someone, if you ever come to my page and speak to me like that again, you will get blocked. I'm very clear, so there's no confusion about where I stand.
The customer service model is ruining academia, and I see the same thing with therapy. It's ruining it.
Why? A therapist isn't a glorified friend or a hand holder or a customer service agent. It's somebody who's supposed to deal with truth. It's supposed to help somebody find truth and find out what's happening for you. You don't have to behave like a telesales customer service person. It's really odd. And again, I noticed that's much more North American, but I find younger therapists behave like that here as well. Exactly like that. And also seem to think that there's a way that you have to be as a therapist, like an endless well of empathy. Well, of course you don't, because you're a human being. And I don't behave like a therapist when I'm not with a client. I behave like myself. And I find that there's this sort of a costume. You put on the therapy costume. Now I'm a therapist, and I'm not fazed by anything. And you can insult me, and I'll just listen to you. It's interesting.
I do have to say that you do have a therapist demeanor. When I speak with a lot of therapists, there's this silence or this really quiet way of speaking. Sometimes it really creeps me out because I can sense something behind there that's being suppressed. But you are. I don't mean that. I probably shouldn't say this, but you kind of have this bull in a china shop vibe to you, where there's this strength, and yet everything is delicate at the same time.
I'm going to tweet this later. I went on Benjamin Boyce's podcast, and he called me a creepy bull in China.
Not creepy. No. I'm saying when I listen to psychotherapists talking with one another, especially on podcasts, they have this really calm way of talking. That calmness can get a little creepy to me. I hear you being calm, but like you are not diminishing your strength at all. So I'm not calling you creepy. I'm saying that you do have that therapeutic calmness in the room. Yeah. But you're not holding back. You're attenuating. There's got to be some sort of way to talk about it in terms of audio. But you're attenuating your volume to the circumstance. But the signal is still very strong. Let me put it that way. I think
that's a compliment, because I had to work really hard to get strong and to put myself back together. I think it might have always been there, because I think that's what I come from. The people I come from are strong people. But I definitely think as a therapist, there's no point being incongruent, because again, I think you we're meant to be dealing with truth. And I think the best way to make contact with another human being is to be authentic and genuine. You can't make real contact and build a real authentic connection, which I want to do with my clients, because for some of them, it's the first healthy relationship they've ever had. You can't do that when you're being a proxy.
A proxy meaning?
Yeah, a proxy sort of yourself. Like, I'm going to now be my therapist self.
Okay, yeah.
Or, yeah, I think you lose something really important and really integral there when you go in and you have this sort of patina of creepiness.
Congratulations for reaching the end of the podcast. If you enjoyed this product, consider donating to this channel via paypal.me/Benjamin Boyce or joining me on Patreon. Also follow me on Twitter at Benjamin A. Boyce. Have a good night.